everyone! Ever thought about how much our childhood really sticks with us? It's clear that even though we choose who we want to be, our early years definitely shape us in big ways.
Absolutely. How we react to things, how we express ourselves, a lot of those patterns actually start forming when we're just little kids trying to make sense of everything.
You know, a couple of marriage and family counselors, Dr. Milan and Kay Yerkovich, came up with this really interesting idea. They found that our upbringing helps form what they call a love style.
A love style? Tell me more.
Well, it's essentially our go-to way of acting and reacting with our romantic partners. And they say that if we understand our own love style, we can really see how it's affecting our relationships. They've pinpointed 5 main ones.
5, huh? I'm curious. What's the first one?
The first is the pleaser. Picture this. Pleasers often grew up with parents who might have been super protective or maybe quick to get angry or criticized. So, as kids, they do anything to be good and keep their parents from reacting negatively.
So they didn't really get comfort themselves, but instead spent their energy trying to comfort their reactive parent. How does that play out when they're adults in relationships?
Great question. Adult pleasers tend to really dislike conflict. They might give in easily or try to patch things up super fast. Saying no is a real challenge for them, and sometimes to avoid a tough conversation, they might not be completely honest.
So they become experts at reading people to keep the peace.
Exactly. But the downside is, if pleasers feel overwhelmed or like they're constantly letting someone down, they can just break down and bolt from relationships. They stretch themselves so thin trying to be everything to everyone.
Sounds exhausting. What do they need to do for healthier relationships?
The big thing for pleasers is to start being honest about their own feelings and needs, instead of just trying to be what they think everyone else wants. Setting some healthy boundaries is key.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the next love style?
Next up is the victim. These individuals often grew up in pretty chaotic homes. To cope, they learn to be really compliant and basically stay off the radar to avoid any trouble.
So if they had angry or harsh parents, they'd learn to just be quiet and hide?
Precisely. And because being fully present was often painful, they'd frequently escape into their own heads, creating imaginary worlds. As you can imagine, this often leads to low self-esteem and struggles with anxiety or depression as adults.
And I bet that affects their choice of partners.
It often does. They might find themselves with partners who are controlling, kind of like their parents were. Victims are used to chaos, so much so that calm situations can actually make them feel uneasy, like they're just waiting for the next problem.
So for victims to build stable relationships, what's the path forward?
It really comes down to learning self-love and finding the courage to stand up for themselves when a situation calls for it, instead of just letting their partner walk all over them.
That's a tough but important journey. What's love style number 3?
Number 3 is the controller. These folks usually grew up in homes where they didn't feel very protected, so they learned early on to toughen up and take care of themselves.
So they need to feel in control to avoid feeling vulnerable, like they did as kids.
Exactly. For them, control means avoiding feelings like fear, humiliation, or helplessness. Interestingly, they don't see anger as a vulnerability. They actually use it as a tool to maintain power.
So they might seem rigid, maybe even unpredictable.
Yes, and they really don't like stepping out of their comfort zones because it makes them feel weak. They prefer to solve problems themselves and want things done a very specific way, and can get angry if it's not.
What's the key for controllers to have more stable, long-lasting relationships?
They need to work on letting go of some of that control, learning to trust others, and finding ways to keep their anger in check.
Makes sense. That brings us to number 4.
Number 4 is the vacillator. Vacillators often had a parent who was pretty unpredictable with their attention and affection. So, they learned that their needs weren't always a top priority for their parents.
That sounds like it would create a real fear of abandonment.
It definitely does. And here's the tricky part. When the parent finally did decide to give them time and attention, the vacillator child was often too angry or just too tired to even receive it.
How does that translate into adult relationships?
As adults, vacillators are constantly searching for that consistent love they missed. They tend to idealize new relationships, putting their partners on a pedestal. But then, if they feel let down or disappointed, even slightly, they can become really dejected and doubtful.
So they feel misunderstood a lot and experience a lot of internal ups and downs.
Yes, and they can be incredibly sensitive and perceptive. They can detect the slightest shift in someone's mood or behavior and know instantly when people are pulling away.
What can vacillators do to cultivate healthier, more stable relationships?
The main thing is for them to learn to pace themselves. They need to really get to know someone before committing too quickly and then getting hurt by their own high expectations.
Taking it slow. Good advice for many. All right, what's the fifth and final love style?
Last but not least is the avoider. Avoiders often grew up in homes that weren't very openly affectionate, where independence and self-reliance were really emphasized.
So as kids, they learned to take care of themselves pretty early on.
Exactly. They often had to put their own feelings and needs on the back burner to deal with the anxiety of not getting much comfort from their parents. As adults, avoiders really like their space.
And they probably lean more on logic and detachment than on emotions.
You got it. They can get pretty uncomfortable when people around them are having intense emotional moments. For avoiders to build those healthy, long-lasting relationships, the key is learning how to open up and express their own emotions honestly.
That's a really insightful rundown of the 5 styles. It makes you think, doesn't it? Which love style do you think you identify with most? We'd love to hear your thoughts.